So let's get on with the content of today's lecture, because I think you will find that it is exciting to delve into the science of the mind and behavior, and that's what psychology is. So way back at the very beginning, Socrates, written by Plato, talked about how people are pulled by two horses, one noble horse and one wild horse, and there is this tension that goes on within people, and part of the role of a person in their life is to figure out how to control these two horses, these two wills that are within us, each one of us. And that's what it's like to be a human being. So even back in ancient Greece, there was an understanding of the idea of psychology. And so when we have the term psychology, it's actually a Greek term, or at least based upon the Greek vocabulary. So the origins of the term psychology come from the word psyche. And if you hold your hand up to your mouth and then blow on your hand, you get the idea of what a psyche is. It is breath. It is spirit. It is soul. It's something that's hard to see. Plus ology, meaning the study or science of something. So it was first used, the term psychology, to mean the study or science of the soul or of the spirit. But it has later come to be understood as the study of the mind. So what exactly is psychology? Well, according to Adam Borland, a clinical psychologist in Ohio, psychology is the science of mind and behavior. In simpler terms, it's a study of how we think and feel and behave as human beings. And let me tell you, it's fascinating to live and work within this field, because human beings are absolutely fascinating and complex creatures. And as you may have guessed, psychology covers a wide range of topics, from human thought and emotions to personality and development. And that's what makes it so exciting. We get to explore and understand all the different aspects of what it means to be a person. Now, I know some people might be skeptical about psychology being a quote-unquote real science, but let me tell you, there's no doubt about it. Psychology is a hub science, intertwining between medical science and social science. And while it may be harder to measure certain concepts and theories objectively than it is, for example, in the harder sciences like biology or physics, it doesn't make psychology any less valid. According to Dr. Gould, an associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, psychology is a science in that there are some very measurable constructs, but there is fluidity in our understanding of the mind. In other words, while the mind may be challenging to quantify, the brain and behavior are more measurable. And that's what we focus on in psychology, is the brain and behavior in modern psychological science. So, there you have it. Psychology is the science of mind and behavior, encompassing a vast range of topics that are both fascinating and important to understand. I hope you're all as excited as I am to dive into this amazing field and learn more about what makes us tick as human beings. Now, in order to understand this field altogether, it's important for us to understand where psychology has been in modern terms. I've already mentioned the ideas from ancient Greece, and there has been ideas about humanity all through history, but we're going to focus mainly on the modern era here to kind of get a sense of what's been happening in psychology. And I want to start off with three individuals that kind of are touch points of psychology and give us an indication of how psychology has changed and developed over time. The very first person I want to mention is Wilhelm Wundt. Wilhelm Wundt's contribution to the history of psychology is significant because he transformed psychology from a branch of philosophy into a scientific discipline. He established the first psychological laboratory in the world in Leipzig, Germany in 1879. And his work emphasized objective measurement and control. Wundt's approach to psychology involved analyzing the workings of the mind in a structured way. And he used scientific methodology to study the conscious experience. He conducted experiments on how people react to various outside stimuli and recorded his results systematically. Wundt's background in physiology is reflected in the topics studied at the Institute of Experimental Psychology, such as reaction times, sensory processes, and attention. He aimed to record thoughts and sensations and analyze them into their constituent elements, similar to how a chemist analyzes chemical compounds to get at the underlying structure. Wundt's introspection method, where he trained assistants who would then reflect on their experiences with a given stimuli, was a fundamental tool of psychological experimentation in the early days. However, experimentation did not remain a fundamental tool beyond the early 1920s as the field developed. But Wundt's influence on psychology can still be seen today in fields like cognitive psychology, where the study of perceptual processes can be traced back to his work. Wundt can be regarded as the founder of experimental psychology and is known as the father of psychology. So in conclusion, Wilhelm Wundt's contribution to the history of psychology is significant because he transformed psychology from a branch of philosophy into a scientific discipline. He established the first psychological laboratory, used scientific methodology to study the conscious experience, and separated psychology from philosophy by emphasizing objective measurement and control. Wundt's work on introspection and mental functioning really is still something that influences psychology today. The next person I'd like to discuss is William James, because William James is one of the most important figures in the history of psychology, particularly in the United States. Now, he was born in New York City in 1842 and was the brother of the famous novelist Henry James. Now, James studied medicine at Harvard University, but he ultimately became a psychologist and philosopher. In terms of the history of psychology in the United States, William James wrote The Principles of Psychology, which defined the budding discipline as the science of mental life. The book was published in 1890 and is still considered a classic work of psychology. James explored a wide range of topics and challenges that anticipated many areas that would be researched more than 100 years later. James was interested in topics such as attention and perception and memory and consciousness and emotion. He also contributed to the development of psychotherapy as well as religious psychology. Now, James' laboratory research in sensation and perception was really conducted in the first half of his career. And he conducted experiments on topics such as the threshold of sensation and the perception of color. Now, James was particularly interested in the relationship between sensation and perception, and he argued that perception is not simply the passive reception of sensory information, but an active process of interpretation and meaning making. Now, James' belief in the connection between the mind and body led him to develop what we now know as the James-Lange theory of emotion. Now, according to this theory, human experience of emotion arises from physiological changes in response to external events. For example, if we encounter a bear in the woods, our heart rate and breathing increase and our muscles will tense up. These physiological changes then give rise to our experience of fear. Now, inspired by evolutionary theory, James's theoretical perspective on psychology came to be known as functionalism. Functionalism sought causal relationships between internal states within a person and external behaviors. James believed that the mind should be studied in terms of its adaptive functions rather than its static structures. He argued that the mind is constantly adapting to changing environmental conditions and that mental processes are shaped by evolutionary forces. Now, James' work had a profound influence on the development of psychology in the United States. His ideas about the connection between mind and body and his emphasis on the functional aspects of mental processes really laid the foundation for many later developments in psychology. James' influence can be seen in the work of later psychologists such as John Dewey, who developed a functionalist theory of education, and B.F. Skinner, who developed the theory of operant conditioning in behaviorism. Now, in conclusion, William James is a key figure in the history of psychology. His book, The Principles of Psychology, defined the discipline as the science of mental life and explored a wide range of topics and challenges that anticipated many areas of research to come. His laboratory research on sensation and perception, his development of the James-Lange theory of emotion, and his functionalist perspective on psychology all contributed to the development of the discipline of psychology in the United States, but also around the world. And I want to close out this little discussion on science of psychology by looking at the contributions of Albert Bandura in the field of psychology. NSRIC is a Canadian institution, and Bandura was a Canadian psychologist who was well known for his groundbreaking research on social learning theory as well as aggression. Bandura was born in Mundare, Alberta, and Bandura studied at the University of British Columbia, but then went on and obtained his PhD in psychology at the University of Iowa. And it was during his time at Iowa that he developed his interest in social learning theory, which posits that people can learn new behaviors through observing and modeling. Now, in 1961, Bandura conducted one of his most famous experiments, known as the Bobo doll experiment. In this study, researchers physically and verbally abused a clown-faced and inflatable toy in front of preschool-aged children. The children were then observed to see if they would mimic the behavior of the adults by attacking the doll in the same fashion. And the results were striking, literally. The children who were exposed to the aggressive behavior of the adults were significantly more likely to exhibit similar aggressive behavior towards the doll. And this experiment demonstrated that children can learn new behaviors through observation and modeling. And it raised important questions about the impact of violent media on children's behavior. Subsequent experiments in which children were exposed to violence on videotape yielded similar results, providing further evidence of the role of social learning in shaping behavior. Now, Bandura's work on social learning had a major impact on the field of psychology, and it challenged traditional theories of behaviorism that had emphasized up to that point the role of reinforcement in shaping behavior. Bandura's theory suggested that people can learn new behaviors without any direct reinforcement, and that observation and modeling are key factors in shaping behavior. In addition to his work on social learning theory, Bandura also made important contributions to the study of aggression. He developed a social cognitive theory of aggression, which posits that aggression is the result of a complex interplay between environmental factors, personal factors, and cognitive factors. This theory has been widely influential in the study of aggression and has helped really to shape our understanding of this very complex phenomenon of aggression. So overall, Albert Bandura was a pioneering psychologist who made significant contributions to the field of psychology. His work on social learning theory and aggression challenged some traditional theories of behaviorism and helped to shape our understanding of the complex interplay between environmental factors, personal factors, and cognitive factors. And his Bobo doll experiment remains a landmark study in the field, and it continues to be cited as evidence of the role of observation and modeling in shaping behavior. Now, while those key figures, Wilhelm Wundt, William James, and Albert Bandura, are important in the history of psychology as a science, there are some other figures that have shaped the discipline profoundly as well. And I want to just highlight some of these key figures because it's not really appropriate to go through any course on psychology without mentioning these key individuals and highlighting a little bit of what they have done for the field and for the world. Because psychology is a fascinating field that seeks to understand human behavior, thought, and emotion. But without the contributions of these figures, we would not have the deep understanding of human behavior that we have today. So, let's dive in and explore some of the major influencers of modern psychology. First, we have Sigmund Freud, considered the founding father of psychoanalysis. Freud's contribution to psychology really is immeasurable, as he introduced the idea that unconscious motivations and desires have a significant influence on human behavior. He developed a structural model of the mind that includes ideas like the id, the ego, and the superego. The id, in Freudian theory, represents the unconscious desires of a person. The superego is the voice of morality and social norms, and the ego is the mediator between the two. Freud's work has influenced not only psychology, but our modern vocabulary. It has influenced literature and art and culture. Now, another major figure in the history of psychology is someone that was actually a colleague of Sigmund Freud for a good part of his career, although they did have a falling out in the end. Carl Jung. Carl Jung, who founded the field of analytic psychology. Jung believed that the majority of human suffering derived from the distresses of the soul or psyche. And so he introduced the concepts of introversion and extroversion so we could understand how we are energized by the world. He introduced the ideas of archetypes and modern dream analysis. And Jung's work focused on the study of the collective unconscious, which he believed was a shared pool of archetypal images and ideas that are present in all human beings. And his ideas about the collective unconscious have had a profound impact on modern psychology, and they really continue to be studied and applied today. Then we have Abraham Maslow. He's another important figure in the history of psychology. He posited that each individual has a hierarchy of needs that must be satisfied, beginning with the basics of food and water and warmth and rest, and progressing to relationships and feelings of accomplishment, and ultimately self-actualization, and maybe even self-transcendence. Self-actualization here is defined as a person reaching their full potential and laying the foundations for what is known as humanistic psychology. So Maslow's work on the hierarchy of needs has had a lasting impact on how we understand things like human motivation and behavior. And lastly, we have Aaron Beck, who was considered the father of cognitive behavioral therapy. The basic premise of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is that the way that individuals perceive a situation is more closely connected to their reaction than the situation itself objectively. So CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, seeks to change how a person thinks and responds to situations. When people are going through a difficult time, their perspective can be inaccurate, and their thoughts might not be grounded in reality. CBT seeks to help people identify when this distortion is happening, to change their thinking, to solve problems, and proactively work on changing their behavior. So Beck's work really has been instrumental in developing evidence-based treatments for a wide range of mental health conditions, and is really in many ways considered a gold standard. So in conclusion, these four figures have had significant contributions to the field of psychology, and their work has paved the way for modern psychology, from Freud's focus on the unconscious to Jung's exploration of the collective unconscious to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and to Beck's development of CBT. Each of these figures has left an indelible mark on the field. We owe a great deal to these individuals for their groundbreaking work, and they will always be remembered as some of the most important figures in the history of psychology. So, just to review the basics of this course, we have the course, Introduction to Psychology. There are 2 quizzes within this course, one after Lecture 9, at Lecture 9 and one at Lecture 20. The history of psychology dates all the way back to the ancient Greek philosophers, but modern psychology as a science really emerged in the late 19th century. We have people like Wilhelm Wundt, who's considered the father of psychology as a science for establishing the first psychological laboratory in Leipzig, Germany. We have William James defining psychology as a science of mental life in his book, The Principles of Psychology. We have Albert Bandura, who conducted famous experiments on aggression and social learning. We have Sigmund Freud, who founded psychoanalysis, one of the first psychological therapies, and introduced the structural model of the mind. We have Carl Jung, who founded analytic psychology and introduced the concepts of introversion and extroversion. We have Abraham Maslow, who proposed the hierarchy of needs and laid the foundation for humanistic psychology. And we have Aaron Beck, who is considered the father of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which seeks to change how a person thinks and responds to situations. And finally, we need to remember that psychology is the scientific study of behavior, of human behavior and mental processes. It encompasses a wide range of topics such as perception, cognition, emotion, personality, social behavior, and mental health, among others. And psychologists use various methods to gather and analyze data, including experiments and surveys and observations and case studies, to better understand how people think, how they feel and behave in different situations. So the ultimate goal of psychology is to improve the lives of people by developing insights into how people function as individuals and as society. And I hope through taking this course that you feel that this is a way that helps you to better serve in a professional role as a social and community service worker. And I hope to see you in our next class, where we explore a little bit about the basics of conducting research in psychology. You take care, and I will see you next class. Goodbye.